April 2026, Tampa, Florida, a city known for its vibrant university life and beautiful coastlines. But on a Tuesday that started like any other, a dark cloud descended over the University of South Florida. Two brilliant doctoral students, Zamil and Nahida, failed to show up for their presentations. They were missing, and the search for them would lead investigators to a site that no one was prepared for. Days later, a quiet residential street in Tampa was transformed into a tactical war zone. The Hillsborough County SWAT team surrounded a family home, guns drawn, shouting for the suspect to come out with his hands up. When the door finally creaked open, the man who stepped out wasn't wearing a tactical vest or hiding a weapon. Hisham Abugharbieh surrendered to the police wearing nothing but a blue towel. It was an image that would soon go viral across the world, but the story behind that towel is far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. To understand the tragedy, we must first understand the lives that were cut short. Zamil and Nahida were more than just students. They were international scholars from Bangladesh, described by their peers as kind, hard-working, and destined for greatness. Zamil was a researcher in environmental policy, while Nahida was a pioneer in chemical engineering. They shared a home, a dream, and a future that was stolen in the middle of the night. April 16, 2026, a date that would forever be etched in the memory of the Tampa community. The day started like any other for Zamil and Nahida. They were seen at the USF campus working in their labs preparing for their final PhD defenses. Surveillance footage from a local convenience store captured them buying groceries at 6 p.m., looking happy and relaxed. There was no sign that anything was wrong. No indication that in just a few hours their digital footprint would vanish forever. By 10 p.m. that night, calls from Zamil's family in Bangladesh went unanswered. This was highly unusual. Zamil never missed his nightly check-in with his parents. By the next morning, the silence had turned into a full-blown panic. Friends arrived at their shared apartment, knocking on the door for hours. The lights were off, the cars were in the driveway, but there was no response. Little did they know, their third roommate, Hisham, was inside the whole time, watching them through the peephole. When the first police officer arrived at the scene for a welfare check, Hisham Abugharbieh finally opened the door. He was calm, chillingly calm. He told the officer that Zamil and Nahida had gotten into a taxi late at night with several suitcases, claiming they were going on a sudden trip. But the officer noticed something that didn't fit. Zamil's shoes, the ones he wore every single day, were still by the door, and the air inside the apartment smelled strongly of industrial bleach and peppermint, as if someone was trying to hide the scent of something metallic. Detectives immediately began verifying Hisham's story. They checked every taxi company in Tampa and reviewed hours of footage from Uber and Lyft drivers in the area. The result was a dead end. No car had arrived at the apartment that night. No suitcases had been loaded. Hisham's sudden trip story was a complete fabrication. But if they hadn't left in a taxi, where were they? The answer lay in the cell phone towers scattered across the city. Electronic evidence showed that at 3 a.m., while Hisham claimed to be sleeping, Zamil's phone was moving. It traveled from the apartment toward the Howard Franklin Bridge. Then the signal flickered and died. Investigators realized that the killer wasn't just trying to hide bodies, he was trying to destroy the digital witnesses. Divers were called to the bay, searching through the murky water for any sign of the missing students' devices. While divers searched the water, forensic teams returned to the apartment with Luminol. To the naked eye, the place was spotless, smelling of fresh cleaning supplies. But under the blue light of the forensic chemicals, a horror story emerged. Large areas of the living room and the kitchen lit up with a glowing blue hue, indicating massive amounts of blood that someone had desperately tried to scrub away. The pristine apartment was actually a massive crime scene. As the blood evidence confirmed a violent struggle, the focus shifted entirely to Hisham Abugharbieh. Who was this man who shared a home with two of USF's brightest stars? Hisham was also an international student, but unlike Zamil and Nahida, his academic career was failing. He had grown increasingly isolated, spending his days locked in his room, while his roommates excelled. Tensions in the apartment had been simmering for months over unpaid rent and Hisham's erratic behavior. Friends later revealed that Zamil had finally given Hisham an ultimatum. It was time for him to move out. But Hisham had no intention of leaving. Instead of packing his bags, he began making disturbing searches on his laptop. In the weeks leading up to the disappearance, he looked for information on how to disable home security cameras, the strength of different industrial cleaners, and the depth of the waters under the Tampa Bay bridges. He wasn't preparing for a move. He was preparing for a permanent solution to his problems. He was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Forensic reconstruction suggests that on the night of April 16th, a heated argument broke out in the kitchen. Zamil had confronted Hisham one last time. It was then that the simmering resentment turned into a deadly rage. Neighbors reported hearing muffled thuds and the sound of furniture moving. But in a busy student apartment complex, no one called 911. By midnight, the apartment was silent. Hisham was now alone with the consequences of his actions, and he began the gruesome task of trying to erase the existence of the two people he once called friends. The investigation took a massive leap forward when detectives checked Hisham's bank statements. Just hours after Zamil and Nahida were last seen alive, Hisham was spotted on surveillance footage at a nearby Home Depot. He wasn't there for home repairs. He was recorded buying several large plastic bins, rolls of heavy-duty duct tape, and gallons of concentrated bleach. He paid in cash, but he couldn't hide from the high-definition cameras staring down at him from the store ceiling. But there was another problem for Hisham. His own car was in the shop, so he had rented a small SUV the week before. What he didn't realize was that modern rental cars are equipped with GPS tracking. When police analyzed the data, they found that the SUV had made several trips to a remote, swampy area near the Hillsborough River in the dead of night. Each trip lasted exactly 45 minutes. It was the digital map of a man disposing of evidence. Back at the police station, detectives brought Hisham in for a formal interview. For hours, he stuck to his story, calm and polite. But when the lead investigator placed the photos of the Home Depot receipts and the GPS logs on the table, the room went silent. Hisham's calm demeanor vanished. He began to sweat, his breathing became shallow, and he repeatedly asked for water. The man who thought he had committed the perfect crime was realizing that he had left a trail of breadcrumbs straight to his door. Based on the GPS coordinates from the rental SUV, the investigation moved to the banks of the Hillsborough River. This area is known for its dense vegetation, murky waters, and most dangerously alligators. But for the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, the risks were necessary. A dive team was deployed, moving slowly through the underwater silt. They weren't just looking for the victims. They were looking for the plastic bins Hisham had purchased just days before. After 6 hours of searching in near-zero visibility, a diver signaled a find. Submerged several feet underwater, weighed down by heavy stones, were the containers. As they were brought to the surface, the grim reality of the situation hit the investigators. Inside, they found the remains of Zamil and Nahida. The brilliant doctoral students who had come to America to build a better life had met a tragic and senseless end in a Florida swamp. The medical examiner's report provided the final, brutal details. This wasn't a crime of passion that happened in an instant. It was a prolonged and violent struggle. The evidence showed that Zamil had fought bravely to protect Nahida before succumbing to his injuries. The level of violence used by Hisham shocked even the most veteran detectives. It became clear that this wasn't just a dispute over rent, it was a cold-blooded execution fueled by years of silent resentment and failure. News of the discovery sent shockwaves through the University of South Florida. Zamil and Nahida weren't just students. They were beloved members of the international community. A makeshift memorial grew outside their lab, covered in flowers, candles, and letters from students who looked up to them. The university held a candlelight vigil, where hundreds gathered in silence. For many, The tragedy highlighted the hidden vulnerabilities of international students who leave everything behind to pursue their dreams. In Bangladesh, the news was a devastating blow. Zamil and Nahida were the pride of their families, the first to travel abroad for advanced degrees. They were the hope for a better future. Their parents, speaking through translators, shared stories of their children's kindness and ambition. They demanded justice, not just for the murder, but for the betrayal of a roommate they had trusted to be a friend. The long process of repatriating their remains began, a journey of grief that spanned continents. As the community mourned, the state attorney's office was building a mountain of evidence. They had the GPS logs, the Home Depot receipts, the forensic blood maps, and now the most damning evidence of all, the recovery of the bodies in bins purchased by the suspect. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty, citing the heinous and premeditated nature of the crime. Hisham Abugharbieh, now held without bond, was facing a legal battle that he could not win with lies. To those who didn't know him well, Hisham Abugharbieh seemed like just another quiet student. But as investigators dug deeper into his past, a pattern of instability began to emerge. Before arriving in Florida, Hisham had struggled in other academic programs. He was a man who felt the world owed him success, but he lacked the discipline to achieve it. As he watched Zamil and Nahida succeed where he had failed, his quiet frustration turned into a toxic, burning envy. Interviews with former classmates revealed disturbing details. Hisham was known for sudden outbursts of anger over minor inconveniences. He had been reported once before for making threatening comments to a professor, but the incident was dismissed as academic stress. Looking back, those close to the victims realized the red flags were everywhere. The man they shared a kitchen with was a ticking time bomb, and the ultimatum about the rent was simply the spark that set him off. As the trial approached, Hisham's defense team began preparing a strategy based on his mental health. They argued that the pressure of being an international student, combined with undiagnosed psychological issues, led to a temporary psychotic break. But the prosecution was ready. They pointed to the premeditation, the Home Depot purchases, the GPS tracking, and the systematic cleaning of the crime scene. This wasn't a man who lost control. This was a man who executed a plan. When the trial finally began, all eyes were on the man in the suit. Hisham Abugharbieh sat at the defense table, showing no emotion as the prosecution displayed photos of the crime scene and the recovered bins. He didn't look at the families of Zamil and Nahida, who were sitting just a few feet away. This lack of remorse became a focal point for the jury. To them, he didn't look like a man who had suffered a mental breakdown. He looked like a man who was still trying to calculate his next move. The prosecution called a key witness, a neighbor who had seen Hisham carrying heavy plastic bins to his SUV at 4 a.m. The witness described how Hisham struggled with the weight, pausing several times to look around and ensure no one was watching. This testimony destroyed the defense's claim that Hisham was in a state of confusion. His actions were deliberate, cautious, and designed to evade detection. The shadow of the death penalty began to loom larger over the courtroom. One of the most emotional moments of the trial was the forensic pathologist's testimony. Using digital models, they reconstructed the final struggle inside the apartment. It was revealed that Nahida had tried to call 911, but her phone was snatched away and crushed. Zamil's defensive wounds told a story of a man who fought until his last breath to protect the woman he loved. The silence in the courtroom was heavy as the jury realized the sheer terror these two young scholars faced in a place they called home. While Hisham sat silently in court, his laptop was telling a different story. Forensic experts from the FBI were called to testify about the search history found on his devices. It wasn't just about cleaning supplies. Detectives found that Hisham had spent hours researching how to delete GPS history from a rental car and average decomposition rates in water. These searches weren't made after the crime. They were made 48 hours before Zamil and Nahida disappeared. This was the smoking gun of premeditation. But even with all his research, Hisham made a critical mistake. He believed that by throwing the victims' phones into the bay, he was deleting their trail. He didn't understand that the data was already backed up to the cloud. Investigators were able to recover a final unsent text message from Nahida to a friend, sent just minutes before the attack started. It read, "Hisham is acting very strange tonight. I'm scared." That single sentence, recovered from a server thousands of miles away, became the voice of a victim reaching out from beyond the grave. In their closing arguments, the prosecution reminded the jury of the image that started it all, the man in the blue towel. They argued that the towel wasn't a sign of confusion, but a final act of arrogance, a man who thought he could wash away a double homicide and simply walk out of his front door. This wasn't a student who broke under pressure, the prosecutor stated, pointing at Hisham. This is a man who calculated the value of 2 lives and decided they were worth less than his own comfort. The jury was now left with a single question: would they deliver the ultimate sentence? The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. In a case with this much forensic evidence, their decision came quickly. As the court clerk prepared to read the verdict, the silence was suffocating. Hisham stood with his lawyers, his face finally showing a flicker of realization. The families of Zamil and Nahida held hands in the front row, waiting for the words they had prayed for since that terrible April night. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. During the sentencing phase, the judge didn't hold back. He described Hisham's actions as calculated, cruel, and devoid of human empathy, while the defense pleaded for life without parole. Citing his age and clean record, the judge looked at the photos of the victims. He sentenced Hisham Abugharbieh to 2 consecutive life terms plus 30 years for the additional charges. There would be no chance for appeal, no second chance. The man in the blue towel would spend the rest of his natural life behind bars. Today, the University of South Florida has established a scholarship in the names of Zamil and Nahida Bristi. It serves as a reminder of their brilliance and the dreams they carried from Bangladesh to the United States, while their lives were tragically cut short by the envy of a man who couldn't face his own failures. Their contribution to science and the hearts of those who knew them remains. Justice was served in a Florida courtroom, but for the world of academia, the loss of these 2 minds is a void that can never truly be filled. Psychologists often point to narcissistic injury when discussing cases like Hisham's. When an individual ties their entire self-worth to academic or professional status, the success of those around them can feel like a direct attack. For Hisham, seeing Zamil and Nahida thrive wasn't just annoying. It was a constant mirror reflecting his own perceived inadequacy. This toxic envy often manifests in a "if I can't have it, no one can" mentality, which is a common trait in domestic-related homicides involving roommates or peers. Criminalists call it the illusion of control. Hisham spent hours researching how to hide his tracks. Yet he used a rental SUV with a built-in GPS and a loyalty card at Home Depot. This paradox occurs because the killer is so focused on the big elements of the crime, like the disposal of the bodies, that they overlook the mundane traces of modern life. In the 21st century, the perfect crime is nearly impossible because our lives are tethered to a digital web that we cannot fully see or control. The image of Hisham appearing in a blue towel has been debated by criminal profilers since the day of his arrest. Was it a desperate attempt to appear vulnerable and confused to the jury, or was it a practical consequence of his obsession with cleanliness after the crime? Some experts believe he had just finished a final, frantic cleaning of the apartment and was caught off guard by the speed of the SWAT intervention. Regardless of the reason, the towel became a symbol of the bizarre contrast between his calm exterior and the violence hidden within the walls of that apartment. In the interrogation room, detectives used a technique known as Reed's 9 steps. They began by offering Hisham face-saving excuses for the crime, suggesting perhaps it was an accident or self-defense. They wanted him to talk, offer any version of events that they could later disprove with forensic evidence. But Hisham's silence was his primary weapon. He sat for hours, staring at a fixed point on the wall, refusing to give the families the closure of a confession. This cold wall of silence only reinforced the prosecution's argument that the killings were carried out by a calculated predator. The murders of Zamil and Nahida quickly became an international incident. The Bangladesh embassy in Washington, D.C. stayed in constant contact with Florida authorities, ensuring that the victims' families were updated in real time, despite the 10-hour time difference. This added a layer of immense pressure on the Tampa Police Department. It wasn't just a local crime anymore. The eyes of a whole nation were watching how the American justice system would treat their brightest citizens. Every piece of evidence had to be handled with extreme care to avoid any procedural errors that could jeopardize the case. Forensic experts also had to contend with Hisham's attempt to chemically alter the crime scene. The heavy use of industrial bleach and peppermint oil was a calculated move to destroy DNA and mask the scent of decomposition. However, modern forensic technology can often see through these attempts. Even though the bleach destroyed some surface samples, the blood that had seeped into the floorboards and behind the baseboards remained. The killer's frantic cleaning actually worked against him, as the irregular patterns of bleach splashes helped investigators determine exactly where the struggle had taken place. During the trial, a neighbor living directly below the apartment gave a chilling testimony. He described hearing what sounded like heavy furniture being dragged across the floor at 2 a.m. He almost called the police, but he assumed it was just students moving out or rearranging their room. This bystander effect, where neighbors hear signs of trouble but hesitate to intervene, is a haunting element of this case. The witness testified that he still struggles with the guilt of not making that phone call, wondering if a single 911 alert could have changed the outcome of that night. Another witness, a student returning from a late-night study session, recalled seeing Hisham in the parking lot. It was nearly 4:30 a.m. The witness noted that Hisham was wearing a heavy jacket despite the humid Florida heat, likely to cover any scratches or stains on his arms. He was moving with a strange mechanical precision, loading the plastic bins into the back of the SUV. The witness remembered thinking it was odd to be moving house in the middle of a Tuesday night, but Hisham offered a polite cold nod before driving away into the darkness. One of the most chilling details revealed by digital forensics was Hisham's knowledge of the apartment complex's security system. Investigators found that several cameras near his unit had been physically tilted or obstructed with adhesive tape just hours before the crime. He was creating dark zones, paths where he could move heavy items without being recorded. This level of planning suggests that the murders weren't just a sudden explosion of rage, but a mission he had been tactically preparing for, turning a familiar living space into a controlled kill zone. While Hisham avoided the cameras at his apartment, he couldn't avoid the sun-passed toll gantries and traffic cameras along the Florida highways. Detectives spent hundreds of hours reviewing grainy footage from the I-75 and the Howard Franklin Bridge. They managed to isolate the rental SUV's license plate at 3:12 a.m., showing a single occupant behind the wheel. The car appeared heavily weighted in the back, its suspension dipping lower than normal. These silent images from roadside cameras provided the bridge between the crime scene and the eventual discovery of the bodies in the swamp. During the first 4 hours of questioning, detectives played the role of sympathetic listeners. They allowed Hisham to describe his relationship with Zamil and Nahida in glowing terms, calling them best friends and family. This was a calculated trap. By getting Hisham to commit to a story of deep friendship, they made his later inability to explain their disappearance look even more suspicious. When the lead detective finally asked, "If they were your family, why didn't you call their parents when they didn't come home?" Hisham had no answer. The silence in the room lasted for nearly 2 minutes, a silence that, in the eyes of the law, spoke louder than any confession. The amount of cleaning products found in the apartment was staggering. Investigators recovered 14 empty bottles of high-strength disinfectant and several used mop heads hidden in the bottom of a trash bin. Forensic analysis showed that Hisham hadn't just cleaned the floors. He had disassembled the U-trap under the kitchen sink to wash away any biological traces that might have been rinsed down the drain. This level of meticulousness is often seen in organized offenders, those who view the crime scene as a puzzle to be solved. He wasn't just hiding a crime. He was trying to reset his environment to a state of perfect, sterile order. In the weeks following the arrests, a wave of anxiety swept through the international student body at USF. Many students who lived with roommates they barely knew began to question their own safety. The university responded by increasing campus security patrols and offering counseling services specifically for the international community. But the damage was done. The idea that a brilliant scholar could be murdered by someone they shared a meal with shattered the sense of sanctuary that the university provided. It forced a conversation about the isolation and mental health, struggles that often go unnoticed in high-pressure academic environments. The recovery operation in the Hillsborough River was a logistical nightmare. The water was not only dark and filled with debris, but it was also home to a large population of alligators. Snipers had to be positioned on the banks to protect the divers as they worked. Every few minutes, the divers had to surface to clear their equipment from thick underwater weeds. This wasn't just a search. It was a battle against the elements. The fact that they managed to recover the plastic bins in such conditions is a testament to the dedication of the recovery teams, who refused to leave until they could bring Zamil and Nahida back to their families. In the months leading up to the tragedy, friends of Zamil and Nahida noticed something unsettling about Hisham. He began appearing at social gatherings he wasn't invited to, often standing in the corner and observing the couple with a strange intensity. He started mimicking Zamil's style of dress and even expressed interest in the same niche research topics. Despite having no background in them, it was as if he was trying to skinwalk into Zamil's life, wanting the respect and love that Zamil received, but without the character or hard work that earned it. Perhaps the most disturbing evidence found by investigators was what Hisham did in the 24 hours after the murders. Surveillance footage from a local cafe showed him calmly ordering breakfast and scrolling through his phone, just hours after disposing of the bodies. He returned to the apartment and reportedly took a nap, seemingly unbothered by the heavy scent of cleaning chemicals and the silence of the rooms that were once full of life. This ability to switch off his emotions and return to a normal routine is a classic indicator of a psychopathic lack of empathy. Hisham thought that by using plastic bins, he would prevent any biological evidence from touching the rental SUV. But forensics is a game of millimeters. Technicians found microscopic droplets of blood wedged into the tracks of the sliding seats and tiny fibers from Nahida's clothing caught in the carpet of the trunk. Even the scent was a giveaway. Despite the overwhelming smell of air fresheners Hisham had placed in the car, police cadaver dogs alerted immediately to the rear of the vehicle. It was a digital and biological trail that no amount of cleaning could fully erase. Investigators were able to reconstruct the final hours of the victims' lives through their financial records. Just hours before the attack, Zamil and Nahida had ordered takeout from a local restaurant to celebrate a recent academic success. They were planning their future, discussing potential job offers, and their eventual return to Bangladesh. The receipt for that meal was found in the kitchen trash, sitting right next to the empty bottles of bleach Hisham would use later that night. It was a heartbreaking reminder of how quickly a night of celebration turned into a nightmare of betrayal. The process of bringing Zamil and Nahida back to Bangladesh was not just a logistical challenge, but a financial one for their grieving families. It took weeks of coordination between the U.S. State Department and local funeral homes. A GoFundMe campaign started by their fellow USF students raised over $50,000 in just 48 hours, covering all costs and providing a small safety net for the parents who had lost their primary providers. When the caskets finally arrived in Dhaka, thousands of people lined the streets. It wasn't just a family funeral. It was a national day of mourning for two lives that represented the hopes of an entire generation. Hisham Abugharbieh is currently serving his sentence in a maximum security facility in Florida. Reports from the prison suggest he remains as isolated as he was in the apartment, rarely interacting with other inmates and spending most of his time in the prison library. He has never issued a public apology or reached out to the victims' families to explain his actions. To this day, he maintains a cold, detached demeanor, a man seemingly stuck in the same silence he used as a weapon during his trial. For the families, his silence is a final, lingering act of cruelty. But for the justice system, his permanent removal from society is the only possible response to such a calculated crime. One of the most critical pieces of evidence was recovered not from the apartment but from a dumpster 3 blocks away. Hisham had tried to dispose of the victims' blood-soaked clothing and the remaining cleaning supplies in a different neighborhood to avoid suspicion. However, a sanitation worker noticed a leaking bag that smelled strongly of chemicals and alerted the police. Inside, forensic teams found gloves with Hisham's DNA on the inside and Zamil's blood on the outside. This cross-contamination was the scientific proof that Hisham was the one who handled the aftermath of the struggle, destroying his defense of being a mere bystander. Bloodstain pattern analysis, or BPA, played a vital role in the courtroom. Experts testified that the patterns on the walls were consistent with the struggle that moved from the kitchen into the hallway. The cast-off patterns suggested the use of a sharp object, and the height of the stains indicated that the victims were on the ground for much of the attack. This technical reconstruction allowed the jury to visualize the violence without needing a confession. It painted a picture of a relentless, high-energy assault that contradicted Hisham's claims of a sudden, confused moment. The science showed it was a determined and focused execution. Despite the thorough search of the apartment and the surrounding waterways, the primary weapon used in the attack was never recovered. Investigators believe Hisham may have used a specialized tool from his engineering studies or a common household item that he destroyed or disposed of far from the other evidence. However, the medical examiner's report was so detailed that the lack of a physical weapon didn't hinder the case. The specific nature of the injuries matched the tools Hisham had researched online, creating a digital fingerprint of the weapon that was just as damning as the object itself. In the first 48 hours before the blood was found, the case was treated as a standard missing persons investigation. Friends and classmates organized search parties, walking through the local parks and distributing flyers with Zamil and Nahida's faces. Hisham was actually seen talking to some of these volunteers, calmly asking if there were any updates. This level of deception standing among the people who loved his victims while knowing exactly where their bodies were is perhaps the most chilling aspect of his personality. He didn't just hide his crime. He stood in the middle of the grief he had caused and watched it unfold. During his initial interview, Hisham tried to plant a seed of doubt by suggesting that Zamil and Nahida had planned a sudden trip. He claimed they had mentioned going to the airport to visit relatives, hoping the police would waste precious hours checking flight manifests. But detectives were one step ahead. They had already secured the victims' passports from inside the apartment, found hidden at the back of a drawer. By claiming they had traveled while their legal documents were still in the house, Hisham trapped himself in a blatant lie. It was a desperate move that showed he was more focused on self-preservation than the safety of his missing roommates. When the news of the murder charges broke, even those who knew Hisham's difficult personality were in shock. Professors described him as a diligent but distant student, someone who never quite fit in, but never seemed capable of such extreme violence. This discrepancy between his public persona and his private actions is what profilers call compartmentalization. Hisham was able to maintain his academic life and his social facade while simultaneously planning and executing a double homicide. This terrifying ability to lead a double life is what makes cases like this so difficult for friends and family to process, as they are forced to reconcile the person they knew with the monster revealed in court. Life in a Florida maximum security prison is a stark contrast to the academic halls of USF. Hisham now spends 23 hours a day in a small concrete cell. Reports from correctional officers suggest that he has requested various textbooks on advanced mathematics and physics, attempting to continue his studies behind bars. However, his requests are often denied due to security protocols. It's a bitter irony. The man who destroyed two brilliant scientific futures is now desperate to reclaim his own. But the walls of Florida State Prison ensure that his knowledge will never benefit the world outside again. To understand the true scale of this tragedy, one must look at the research Zamil and Nahida left unfinished. They were working on sustainable energy solutions that could have revolutionized power grids in developing nations like Bangladesh. Their professors believed they were on the verge of a major breakthrough. By extinguishing their lives, Hisham didn't just commit a double murder, he committed a crime against progress itself. The empty chairs in the laboratory remain a silent testimony to the brilliance that was stolen not by a professional rival, but by a roommate who couldn't handle the light they cast. Long after the apartment was cleared and the crime scene tape removed, Zamil and Nahida's digital footprints remained. Their social media profiles, filled with photos of their travels and academic achievements, became digital memorials. Thousands of messages from strangers and friends flooded their comment sections, expressing a global grief. For investigators, these profiles were more than just memories. They provided a clear timeline of the victims' last happy moments, contrasting sharply with the dark reality Hisham was preparing for them in secret. It serves as a reminder that in the modern age, our stories continue to be told through the data we leave behind. The case of the man in the blue towel is more than just a story of a double homicide. It's a cautionary tale about the people we let into our private spaces. It challenges the assumption that shared goals or academic brilliance are guarantees of character. As the sun sets over the University of South Florida today, students still walk past the building where it happened, most unaware of the tragedy that once unfolded there. But for those who remember Zamil and Nahida, the message is clear. Cherish every moment, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the shadows that can hide behind a quiet neighbor's door. Florida is known for having some of the strictest sentencing laws in the United States, and for a long time the death penalty was a very real possibility for Hisham Abugharbieh. The prosecution spent months weighing whether to seek the ultimate punishment, considering the heinous nature of the crime and the clear evidence of premeditation. This legal pressure is often used to encourage defendants to accept a plea deal of life without parole, saving the victims' families from the trauma of a decade-long appeals process. For Hisham, the reality of Florida's broken justice system meant that even without a death sentence, his future was a permanent erasure from the free world. In the wake of the tragedy, the University of South Florida implemented significant changes to its international student housing protocols. New screening processes were introduced, and a more robust reporting system for roommate disputes was established to ensure that quiet frustrations never again escalated into fatal violence. The university realized that academic excellence cannot exist in a vacuum. The mental well-being and domestic safety of its students are equally vital. These changes, while unable to bring Zamil and Nahida back, stand as a legacy of safety for the thousands of international scholars who follow in their footsteps every year. At the University of South Florida's engineering department, the loss is still felt in the small everyday moments. Zamil's desk remained untouched for months, a collection of half-finished equations and printed research papers that no one else had the heart to complete. His colleagues speak of a man who was always the first to arrive and the last to leave, a mentor to younger students who saw him as the gold standard of what an international scholar should be. This wasn't just a loss of two lives. It was the loss of decades of potential innovation that could have changed the lives of millions. The laboratory is quieter now, a haunting reminder that brilliant minds are fragile, and safety is never something to be taken for granted. As we close this investigation, the image of Hisham in that blue towel remains the ultimate symbol of the case, a mask of innocence that hid a calculated darkness. Zamil and Nahida's story is a testament to the pursuit of the American dream, a dream that was cut short by the very person who shared their home. May their memory serve as a light for other students, and may their families find peace knowing that their brilliance was never truly extinguished, but merely moved to a place where no shadow can reach it. Thank you for watching, and for helping us keep the memory of Zamil and Nahida alive.